All right, we'll give it one more minute. And like I said, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat before we get started. I'll just say I'm Tamar. I'm dialing in from New York. All right. Well, welcome to Climate Action at Work, sponsored by Work on Climate. My name is Tamar Meltzer. I'm a volunteer on the sub-communities team at Work on Climate. I'm also joined by fellow Work on Climate volunteers Victoria Tkachenko and Alex Tillett Miller, who are helping to monitor the chat and support on the tech side. Our presenter today is Aiyana Bodi, Employee Engagement Manager at Project Drawdown. So our format today will begin with a presentation led by Aiyana, followed by an audience Q&A for about 10 to 15 minutes before we close. Just so you're aware, this session is being live streamed and recorded. But before the session starts, I would like to quickly tell you a little bit about Work on Climate. So with over 30,000 members and growing, Work on Climate, a nonprofit organization, is the world's largest, most active community addressing talent shortages in climate. We are on a mission to transform the talent ecosystem and build the workforce humanity needs to solve climate change equitably and justly. Our goal is to make climate work mainstream, empowering hundreds of millions of people everywhere with the skills and support they need to use their talents to build climate solutions. Since you're attending this particular session, you may want to join the Learn Workplace Climate Action channel in the Work on Climate Slack community. Learn Workplace Climate Action is a collaborative space for professionals who are passionate about driving climate action and sustainability within their workplaces, even if their organizations aren't traditionally climate focused. In this sub-community, members can share resources, ask questions, and join discussions about climate action and sustainability in the workplace. If you have any questions about joining our Slack community and the channel itself, leave us a note in the Zoom chat box and one of the moderators will help you. And finally, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Aiyana. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Mar, and thank you so much for being here today. Please feel free to keep putting your name, where you're calling in from, into the chat. I like to see where folks are from. I saw that we have a high schooler here, which is awesome, so welcome. I'm also pretty informal when it comes to presenting, so please feel free to keep your camera off. We'll have time for Q&A later. There will also be some opportunities for you to put some answers and your thoughts into the chat. I'll launch a poll later, so yeah, just kick back, relax, enjoy, and yeah, I'll let you know when it's time to maybe participate yourself. But yeah, like Tamar mentioned, I'm Aiyana Bodi. I am part of an organization called Project Drawdown, and our mission is super simple. It's to help solve the climate crisis as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible. And we do that through various different work streams around promoting science, promoting storytelling, and bringing science of climate solutions to stakeholders, specifically the private sector. And that's where I'm really going to focus today. I'm really going to talk about how can the private sector be better on climate, and how can you as an employee be part in kind of pushing your company or employer to be more ambitious when it comes to taking climate action. I mentioned in the chat, but I'm based in Brooklyn, and I think I saw a few folks from the New York area, so hello. Yeah, and I'll get started. So before I jump into the content of the presentation, I do kind of just want to set everything within this context of this new administration that we're going to be entering into in just 6 days here. And I bring it up because I think it's really important to mention, and yeah, I will say there are a lot of climate change memes throughout this presentation. But I think we can all agree here in the US that federal policy is not going to be a really effective lever to pull. And I bring that up because I want to mention that even though we may have lost a really important lever, we still have a really huge lever when it comes to our workplaces and when it comes to the private sector. And I hope this presentation can kind of inspire us all to really double down in that area of influence in the next 4 years. And I think, unfortunately, companies, corporations have a lot of power. And with the federal government kind of down for the count for the next few years, we really need these other major power holders to like step up and fill that gap, that climate action gap. So, again, right now, unfortunately, companies hold a lot of power. They also, as a whole, aren't really doing enough on climate. I think we can all agree with that. And so we really need them to level up their climate ambition. And this presentation is going to talk a little bit about like how can we get them to be better, specifically, how can you, an employee, help your company be better on climate? Because at the end of the day, companies really are just made up of people. And while like a really few powerful people sit at the top of these organizations, that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people that sit below them, and those are the ones that are actually running these companies and actually keeping them going. And so this means that employees really have a lot of power to create change within their companies. So that kind of brings me quickly to like the why of today's presentation. And I just want to ground you kind of quickly in what I'll be talking about today and why, when it comes to businesses scaling climate solutions, employees who don't have sustainability in their titles are really, really crucial pieces to moving private sector climate action forward. So kind of like the theory of change, I guess you could say, behind the content I'm going to be talking about today is that when employees understand two things, so when they understand the level of climate ambition that businesses should have, and when they also understand kind of, the power and the opportunity that they have in their roles to take action, then they can really leverage the roles, the existing experience and knowledge that they already have to take really impactful action within their roles in order to kind of level up their company's climate effort. So we all know that we need companies to be more ambitious on climate, and employees really are the drivers of that more ambitious action. And so when we kind of understand the level and expansiveness of actions that companies really should be taking on climate, and then that also means we need to bring in so many more employees, not just sustainability employees, to help reach those more ambitious goals and climate actions. So employees across functions, when they start taking climate action in their roles and in their workplaces, there's this really awesome like bottom up ripple effect that helps move their companies toward more ambitious action. And that's really what I'm going to be focusing on today. But I want to quickly start with a little icebreaker, and this is kind of my ask for you to put some things in the chat right now for the next just like 30 seconds. I'm really curious, what does climate action at work mean to you? Because it is a pretty vague phrase. And so I'm curious what it really makes you think of. Does it make you feel a certain emotion? Maybe it kind of makes you think about bringing your values or your passion to work. So yeah, just take about 30 seconds to put in the chat, what does climate action at work mean to you? Yeah, acknowledging harm done and potential realistic solutions. That's great. People and planet can be in the same equation as profit. A way to give back, make an impact. Influencing your company into change. Supporting your organization in reaching their corporate sustainability goals. Collecting more data. Changing the paradigm of who is allowed to work on climate. Wonderful, Drew. Measuring impact. Reducing single-use items. Collective and cross-sector responsibility. Any job can be a climate job. Yeah, these are all great. And I love that everyone has, slightly ways of thinking about it. Some people think of like really specific solutions. Some people think about like where power lies. People think about like helping their companies reach their climate goals. All of these are correct. And I think taking climate action in the workplace will be really contextual and specific to you, depending on where you work, the culture of the company that you work for, what role you're in, how much power or agency you have, who you work with. All of these things really matter when it comes to what does taking climate action in the workplace mean to you. But this is great. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with me. It's nice to just like see everyone kind of, everyone has slightly different definitions, but I think all of our kind of values and intentions are aligned. And so I'm going to dive into my actual presentation now. And I'm going to start with climate solutions and the role of business. So like I mentioned earlier, I think it's really important for us to first understand, what do businesses actually need to be doing on climate? So I think obviously we all know that the climate crisis is a massive problem. Let's see if this video will play. And at Project Drawdown, we've actually cataloged like almost 100 solutions to the climate crisis. So on a very positive note, even though we were coming up against this massive crisis known as climate change, we also know that we have the solutions to solve it, right? So at Drawdown, we have cataloged 100 solutions to the climate crisis that are currently available, they're going in scale, they're financially viable, and they have a net positive impact on the world. So that's great. We know what we need to do to help solve the climate crisis. But kind of the next natural question is, okay, we have all these solutions, but whose responsibility is it to scale these solutions? And when we look a little closer, I think it becomes fairly obvious who has the obligation. And I will say businesses obviously aren't the only entities emitting carbon emissions, but they have, a lot of, they have a big obligation to help solve the climate crisis. And I'll get into that and get into why in just a second. But I do just want to reiterate that businesses have so much financial, political, social, and cultural power. And all of this, as you can imagine, has major implications for the climate and for the environment. I don't need to read out these stats, but basically these stats just kind of show that, yes, companies have done a lot to mess up our climate. But I bring these up because of this influence, businesses really do have an obligation to help address the climate crisis. Because let's face it, they're kind of a big reason for the mess that we're in. And another thing to really remember here is that companies, corporations, they haven't just emitted a lot of greenhouse gases, but they also have used their power and their influence to essentially hide us, the public, from the magnitude of the issue and like actively obstruct us from the issue. So from things like misinformation and greenwashing to, peddling false solutions and like lobbying against climate policy, big business has had a climate impact beyond just directly emitting greenhouse gases. And one other thing I want to mention that just kind of gets to like the importance of people within these companies kind of like stepping into their power as change makers is that, companies are obviously producing the things that you and I need, like food and clothes and energy and, the things that we use on a day-to-day basis. So I don't think it's necessarily realistic or equitable even to assume that like everyone can switch to more climate-friendly alternatives all the time. But if we can get more people who work for these companies to take climate action inside these companies, then we can hopefully transform the way that these businesses are creating the products and services that we use and need on a daily basis. And so, yes, obviously companies have a big obligation when it comes to the climate crisis, but they also have a lot of opportunity when it comes to taking climate action. And I think this is a really important factor, a really important fact to think about. They have a lot to gain, and it's really crucial that employees who are advocating for change in the workplace remember this point, because this is really what will convince people that, or convince leadership to take action on climate, the fact that they do actually have a lot to gain from doing so. So businesses just do better when they engage on climate and when they engage their employees on climate. So they, like organizations that take sustainability seriously, often see higher revenue. They often see a lot more motivation and loyalty from their employees, especially younger employees, because when companies care about climate, their employees can see that, and it's generally just better for morale, well-being, retention, work quality, innovation, and all of that snowballs into it just being better for business. So companies have a lot of opportunity when it comes to taking climate action. Okay, so now we know that companies are obligated to take action on the climate crisis. We know that they also have a lot to gain from taking climate action. But what do they really need to do? Like a lot of companies say they're going to be net zero by 2050, but like, is that actually enough? And hint, it's not enough. And it's not hard to just pull random headlines on a weekly basis that shows that clearly the private sector as a whole is not doing enough on climate. They have lofty goals, but they're not meeting them. They're creating products and services that are actively contributing to the climate crisis. Um, they're they're backing out of their climate pledges. So yeah, it's very clear that the private sector as a whole not meeting the scale or the severity of the crisis when it comes to climate action. And this is what brings me to the Drawdown Aligned Business Framework. And I'm happy to put this framework into the chat here. But basically, this framework is meant to expand how organizations and companies approach climate action. So at Project Drawdown, we do a lot of work with companies to help them essentially just be better on climate and be better on corporate sustainability. And through that work, we kind of came up with this framework that shows 8 different areas of influence or 8 different levers that companies have to pull when it comes to taking climate action. So obviously, when people think of climate or corporate sustainability, they usually think about that first orange square. They think about a company reducing its emissions, maybe only its operational emissions. But there are so many other things that a company could be doing that utilizes the political power they have, the financial power they have, and the social power that they have to scale climate action, not just within the 4 walls of their company, but really scale climate action in the broader world, again, using the influence and power that they have in society. So again, a lot of people will think of, when they think of corporate sustainability, they'll think of something like, oh, a business switching to renewable energy, reducing waste, cutting down on business travel, things like that. That all kind of falls under that orange square of reducing emissions. And all of that is great. We need companies to do that, but knowing how much needs to change in the world to mitigate the climate crisis, organizations really need to be approaching climate in a much more elevated and expansive way. I'm not going to dive really deep into each lever because we only have like 20 or 30 more minutes. But I encourage all of you to check out this framework online, and I just posted the link in the chat. But I'm going to go through each lever really briefly, and I'm also going to show you real life examples of businesses aligning with this framework and kind of pulling these different levers using their influence to take more ambitious climate action beyond what we traditionally think of as corporate sustainability. So great, let's dive into the first square, emissions reductions. Really, this is just about obviously reducing your emissions, pretty straightforward, but it's also about being more ambitious when it comes to reducing your emissions as a company, as a business. So accelerating your goals, having interim targets. So instead of just saying, oh, we're going to be net zero by 2050, having a plan that is like your 2030 goal, your 2040 goal, then your 2050 goal. Phasing out the use of offsets, not relying on carbon removal technology, addressing your supply chain or scope 3 emissions, embedding climate justice, and really incentivizing emissions reductions in your company. And one really good example of a company pulling this emissions reduction lever, specifically by kind of institutionalizing their emissions reduction efforts, is Chipotle, which is, I never thought Chipotle would be a climate leader, but they actually tie 15% of their executives' annual bonus incentives to achieving ESG metrics. So they're actively institutionalizing their emissions reduction efforts by incentivizing it for their leadership. The next lever in the framework is stakeholder engagement and collaboration. Also pretty straightforward. It's just about engaging people beyond just your shareholders, but like your employees, your clients, your colleagues, your board, the communities that you operate in. Is the company engaging all of those people on climate action as well? One example here is Microsoft. They're engaging and supporting their local communities by developing community scale solar for 100 communities that will prioritize local workforce and low income energy users. So great example of a company kind of using its scale and its influence to support communities and becoming more sustainable. Next, we have the products, partnerships, and procurement lever. Again, also pretty straightforward. This is really just about ensuring your products or your services aren't serving bad climate actors. So hopefully you're not selling services to fossil fuel companies to help them drill faster. Hopefully you're requiring your suppliers to also adopt science-based climate targets, and hopefully you're prioritizing circularity and low carbon materials in your products. A good example here is Vox Media. So they actually banned fossil fuel advertising from their platform. So they're not giving fossil fuel companies any type of platform on their platform, and not allowing them to advertise using the Vox Media brand. So it's a great example of ensuring that your products or your services don't serve bad climate actors. The next bucket we have is investments and financing, really just about making sure your company's investments or cash is, again, not indirectly contributing to the climate crisis. So making sure your company offers climate-friendly retirement plans for your employees, pushing the banks that you work with to also take climate action and align their investments with climate solutions, pressuring your insurance companies to stop underwriting climate or fossil fuel projects. There's a lot more that goes into this bucket, and happy to talk to more folks about this particular lever. But basically just aligning your company's money and investments with climate solutions and not with the things that are causing the climate crisis. Great example here. Patagonia is a great example of all of these levers, honestly, but Patagonia is one company that is like very actively engaging their banks that they use to align with global climate goals. So just the way that like a company might engage their supply chain partners on climate, Patagonia is doing the same, but with their financial partners. They're awesome. And there's a really great, oh, thank you for posting it in the chat. That's a really good overview of kind of what they're doing to engage their banks on this issue. Next is climate disclosures. Again, pretty straightforward. All about, is your company publicly disclosing climate-related risk and supporting mandatory disclosure standards? This one might be a little bit out of date just because now in the US we're seeing mandatory disclosure requirements, both at the federal level and more strongly at the state level in California and hopefully in New York as well. But a good example of a company here is REI. They very actively supported the legislation in California that now requires standardized climate-related disclosures. So great example of a company publicly supporting climate disclosures. Next, we have climate policy advocacy, also straightforward. Is your company advocating for climate policy or is it actively obstructing it? Are they using their influence to advocate for climate policy? Are they aligning their political contributions? Are they lobbying for climate policy? Are the trade associations that your company is a part of, are they lobbying for climate policy or actively obstructing them? So a good example here is Seventh Generation. I personally use their cleaning products all the time, but they really use their influence as a company to advocate for climate policy. They like very publicly supported the Inflation Reduction Act. They publicly called on President Biden to stop the construction of the Line 3 pipeline, and they do a lot of work to encourage their customers to vote for climate committed candidates. So they're a great example of a company using its influence to not only support climate policy, but also encourage their customers to support climate policy. Okay, and then I have two more levers and then we'll be done with this framework. But this one is business model transformation, really just about, is your company embedding climate considerations into every part of the business, into every business decision that it makes? Great example here is Ørsted. Ørsted is an energy company that used to make the majority of its money from the fossil fuel business, and they literally transformed their entire business model to focus solely on renewable energy, which is awesome. And then this last lever here, long-term thinking, it's a little nebulous, but basically what it means is, does your company value the long-term health of people and planet over short-term profit? And the last example here is Asana. I love Asana. We use them for project management and Project Drawdown. And they're also listed on the long-term stock exchange, which is a really cool site. I recommend people to check it out. But basically it means Asana is committed to advancing a more equitable and sustainable society by meeting these certain principles that the long-term stock exchanges come up with that are designed to serve all stakeholders. So they are committed to not just serving their shareholders, but all of their stakeholders, which includes people and the planet. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully you retained something from that. But basically the point of that framework is to show you what your company really should be doing on climate and how they should be thinking about climate beyond just let's fly less, beyond just let's recycle in the office. They need to be thinking about things like, are we invested in fossil fuels? Are our products contributing to the climate crisis? Do we do business with the fossil fuel industry? They need to be thinking about so much more. So I'm going to launch a poll here in a second because I'm very curious how y'all feel about your company's actions on climate and if you think that they're more, or if you think that they're ambitious enough. So I'm going to launch this poll here in a second. Great. Hopefully you all are seeing that. But yeah, how do you feel about your company's climate actions after learning about this framework? Do you think they are ambitious? Do you not? Maybe you thought they were, but now you don't think they are. I'm really curious what people think. And so far, it looks like the vast majority of you do not think your company's climate actions are ambitious enough, which is kind of what I expected. But it's great. Some of you think that they are ambitious enough, which is awesome. And like all the examples I showed you, there are companies out there that are pulling some of these levers already. Great, so I'll just give that a couple more seconds because I think we're just over 50% participation, but I'll just keep this open for a little bit longer. But yeah, it seems like the majority of you, 52% of you, do not think your company's climate actions are ambitious. And again, I'm not surprised, most companies aren't ambitious on climate. So I'm going to end this poll here so we can keep chugging along through the results. So yeah, majority of you do not think your company's climate ambition actions are ambitious enough. And so I'm going to get into how you might be able to get your company to be more ambitious on climate through using your role and your power as an employee to create impact. So how can you, as a non-sustainability employee, especially help your company in achieving these more ambitious climate targets that we just covered in the Drawdown Aligned Business Framework? So I'm going to go through a few reasons first around like why are non-sustainability employees really crucial to this? And I think the first reason, kind of as expressed by this Simpsons meme, is that climate change affects all of us. And so we all kind of need to play a part in helping our planet not well, I don't want to say actively burn because it is already actively burning, but how can we all play a role in helping mitigate the climate crisis? And some of you might be thinking, oh, well, that's why sustainability teams exist, right? It's their job to help companies reach their climate goals. But that is really not the case because sustainability teams are really, really under-resourced. They're often like made up of just a few people. Sometimes there isn't even a sustainability team. Sometimes it's one person for a company of hundreds or thousands of people. They really can't do everything. This meme like makes me crack up so much because they kind of have people yelling at them from both sides, right? They have people not like thinking that they're doing too much. They have people thinking that they're not doing enough. I'm usually on the left side thinking that they're not doing enough. But part of the reason maybe they're not doing enough is because they just can't, because they're under-resourced and they really need the support of their colleagues to help them, ultimately transform the way that their company does business. And as we learned with the Drawdown Aligned Business Framework, because there are so many levers that businesses can pull for climate, it means that so many more people need to be brought into this work. And sustainability really can't just be within the purview of sustainability teams. So another reason that I think non-sustainability employees are really crucial in scaling climate action in the private sector or within institutions is is because the nature of work is changing. I think we've seen that a lot since kind of the height of COVID, but people, especially younger people, are increasingly seeking more values and purpose from their work. And this has a lot of implications for climate. It means that climate concerns are showing up in workplace related decisions. So 46% of millennials and Gen Z have already changed or plan to change jobs or industries due to climate concerns. Maybe some people in this audience have also done that. And 50% of millennials and Gen Z are actively pushing their employers to drive change on environmental issues. And again, I'm sure a lot of you are already doing that. And I can only imagine these numbers will get higher as more and more people become concerned with climate change. And I think this is just important to bring up because I think businesses will really respond accordingly because this is a trend that has pretty major implications for things like, attracting talent and retaining talent and like ensuring your employees are like happy with where they work. So because businesses are kind of aware that, oh, like our employees are really starting to care about this, I think the ground is really fertile for employees to take climate action because I think leadership is really starting to listen. And the last reason employees are really needed in climate action is simply just because we have the power to create change and our agency really does extend beyond ourselves. I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way and you can feel like it doesn't, but I promise you it does. If one or multiple people act in a larger system, then that impact is already going to be scaled. And I think the workplace is a really good example of that. And there's already proof that employees are driving company climate action. So almost 60% of business leaders say employee climate action has already caused them to increase their sustainability efforts. So there is proof that when employees speak up, their business leaders listen to them and create change. So again, just want to reiterate that we do have a lot more power than we might think we do, especially in kind of these organizational and institutional settings like the workplace. Okay, so just landing on the drawdown aligned business framework again for just one more second. I bring this up because I just really want to reiterate again that because there are so many ways for businesses to use their influence to scale climate action, that means that there are so many ways for all employees to be involved in climate action. So using this framework, employees can really start to connect how their roles can lead to their companies taking more ambitious action, right? So it's not just sustainability teams, but it's marketing, legal, procurement, HR, engineering, product design, asset management, all of these different functions and more are needed when it comes to scaling climate action if we want it to be at the level of ambition that we need it to be. So I bring these functions up on the screen because at Project Drawdown, we've created 12 action guides that help people in common corporate professions turn their jobs into climate jobs so that they can be, climate champions. And I can put the link in the chat, though I think they might have already been shared, but I'll just share it again. So that's the link to the action guides. There's 12 of them. They cover these 12 functions that you see on the screen. Definitely encourage you to check them out if any of these line up with any role that you're in. And they all contain just basically a whole list of recommended actions that you can take, climate actions you can take that relate to the role that you already have. There's links to a bunch of other resources, how to get started, etc. So yeah, definitely encourage y'all to check those out if you haven't already. But yeah, every job really is a climate job. I'm going to show you a few examples of that in just a second. But just to drive home this message one more time, that because every aspect of a business needs to change from its operations to its partnerships, its products, ultimately its entire business model, it really does mean that you can use the skills and the knowledge and expertise that you already have, that you've cultivated in the role that you already have to help bring about that change. And this is a really good tactic actually for scaling climate action in the workplace, to kind of marry it with the roles and responsibilities you already have. Will give you a lot of leverage and will really make it easier, I think, for you to kind of move things forward. Okay, so basically now you're getting the idea that businesses need to do more and employees play a really critical role in helping their companies do better. So I'm going to walk you through a few examples of that. I'm going to share a few stories of employees turning their jobs into climate jobs, using their roles to pull these different levers of influence that we covered in the Drawdown Aligned Business Framework. Oh yeah, the screen is supposed to be black, just in case anyone's wondering. I'll get to the good stuff in a second. I'm trying to create suspense. But yes, I'm going to dive into some real life examples of employees taking climate action. Just a quick note that I did change the names and the companies, and like they're obviously like very obviously stock photos, just because I didn't get like express permission to use these stories for this specific presentation. So I just wanted to be overly cautious, but these stories are all real and all of these people are real. I'm just using stock images. So first I'm going to talk about Amanda. She is helping pull the emissions reduction lever within her company, specifically by helping her company address supply chain emissions. So she works in cybersecurity at a big tech company. And while her job in cybersecurity isn't directly related to carbon emissions, she is in a role that helps kind of drive company-wide change. So she can use and apply the same skills and responsibilities that she's learned in cybersecurity to sustainability. And she's super active in advocating for carbon reduction initiatives, and she partners with the company's cloud providers, aka their supply chain partners, to host sustainability workshops for her engineering teams, to educate them on how they can do their work in a more energy efficient way, thereby reducing the company's overall Scope 3 emissions. So she's a really great example of an individual employee kind of pulling this emissions reduction lever within her company to scale climate action. Next, we have Lisa. Lisa works at a manufacturing company as a program manager, but she's also just a part of the company's sustainability community or sustainability committee. And because she was, connected to other climate passionate people through this sustainability committee, she saw this really great opportunity to work with her colleagues to be more deliberate about integrating climate and sustainability throughout the entire company. So she led efforts to create these internal sustainability action guides for all of the major teams and departments within her company, thereby making it a lot easier for other employees to find those connections between their job and climate. So she's basically helping everybody turn their jobs into climate jobs at her company. Next, we have Anita. She's pulling the products, partnerships, and procurement lever. She is a designer at a home goods company, and she works with them to ensure their material considerations are being prioritized in the products. And she's also leading the company through really innovative recycling and upcycling processes. She's analyzing all of their and upgrading all of their packaging, and she's currently developing a take-back system so that their products at the end of their life can be sent back to the company and then upcycled into something new. So she, is a designer, but she is like very seamlessly integrating sustainability into her design practice at this company. All right, next we have Dan, who's pulling the investments and financing lever. He is another program manager at a software company, and he co-chaired the company's employee green team. And in just his first year, he worked across departments to debut a climate-friendly 401k option for the company, which has over 1,000 employees, which is awesome, really great, like scaled impact. So yeah, Dan is a great example of someone who worked to get their company to offer a climate-friendly retirement option for everybody. All right, next we have Antonio, who's pulling the climate policy advocacy lever. He's been leading a campaign to pressure his big tech company to leave the US Chamber of Commerce, which is like very well known for obstructing climate policy. If you work for a big company, I definitely encourage you to see if your company is a part of the US Chamber of Commerce. They like very actively lobbied against the Inflation Reduction Act here in the US. So him and his colleagues have been educating their peers and giving presentations and events inside the company on this issue. They were mobilizing people to sign a petition to get their company to act on this. And their efforts actually coincided with the company eventually auditing all of its trade association memberships, essentially confirming this kind of misalignment on key climate policies within the US Chamber of Commerce. And then the final example I have is Sarah, who's pulling the business model transformation lever. She is a culinary director at a major food service company. They provide food to institutions like hospitals and schools. She's centering climate in her work by making her company's menus more plant-based, thus making their menus more climate friendly. And because she's helping lower the amount of animal product or emissions intensive products in their recipes, it means that the company's main way of doing business, which is servicing food to other companies and institutions, is now embedded with climate considerations. So she's a great example of someone pulling this business model transformation lever in her company. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to y'all one more time before I end the conversation. I would love for you to brainstorm a couple of actions that you want to take in your work to turn your job into a climate job and put them in the chat. Here are just some guiding questions that might help you come up with some ideas. So how is your job related to energy use or use of materials? What stakeholders do you interact with, like your colleagues, your customers, other partners? How do you interact with them? Are you interacting with them at all on climate or sustainability? Do you have any sway or say over budget or financing strategy, maybe on your team or organization? Is there a way you can center climate solutions just in the projects that you do on a day-to-day basis? So yeah, would love for you guys to come up with just a couple of ideas of how you can take action in the workplace and put them in the chat. And we can just do that for the next 30 seconds to a minute. And thank you everyone for putting such great, have like such great conversation in the chat and all these other resources. This is awesome. So maybe some of the examples I just shared, maybe you want to try to get your company to offer a climate-friendly 401k. Can you, reduce power usage for oh wow, Kevin, I'm not even sure what that means, but it sounds great. Raise awareness about how our eating habits are contributing to climate change. Yeah, a really great and simple thing you can do is literally just start talking about climate with your colleagues. You don't have to say the word climate. You can talk about like reducing food waste or, saving on your electricity bill, things like that. Totally agree, Amir. Everything is climate. Yes, totally. Organize an employee petition. That's great. Climate Fresk is a great way to get people involved on climate, especially in a workplace setting. More research. Yeah, definitely. Anyone who is interested in starting a green team, definitely check out Drew Wilkinson. He is the master of green teams. Raising awareness around other employees, learning about current climate action taken in the company. Yeah, that's a great first step. Just start to get to know what your company is already doing on climate. And that way you can see what's being done. Maybe you can build on the successes that have already happened. Maybe you can come up with some ideas to fill in the gaps. Yeah, presenting resources to your boss. That's a great idea. Collaborating with your green team to formalize the status of the green team. Yep, that's great. Yeah, these are great. And I think, again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but taking climate action in the workplace will look different for everybody. And I hope some of the examples I showed really exemplify that it really just depends on what you're interested in, what your company is doing, what role you're in, what industry you're in. So it really will look very different for everybody, and depending on where you are in your climate journey too. Some people might be like, oh, right, I'm ready to like organize a petition against my leadership. Other people might be like, I'm not there yet. I'm just going to start talking about it like in the break room. So again, it really varies, but all of it is really needed and important. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up with just a few more slides. I'm just going to talk about four steps that you can take after this presentation to kind of get going on your climate solutions at work journey. So the first is to pick something to pursue. So you all kind of brainstormed a couple of ideas, but eventually you do want to have kind of one ask or one thing that you want to change about how something is done where you work. And helping you choose what you want to pursue, there are a couple of considerations to think about. So you want to pick something that is, impactful, something that you might have some influence over, something that you can garner support for, and probably the most important is something that really excites you, something that you're really interested in. So the first step is to just pick something to pursue. The next step is to really think about who are the decision makers. So once you think, okay, I want to change this thing, I want to change how this thing is done within my workplace or within my team. Now I need to figure out, like, who is the decision maker around that? Like, who is the person that I need to say yes? Maybe it's multiple people. Who do I need on board to move this action forward? And maybe it's your immediate supervisor. Maybe it's someone higher up. Maybe it's actually someone on the sustainability team. So you might need to do some sleuthing to figure out who is in charge of this thing that you are trying to change. And then next, you really need to build your business case. What points do you need to make to convince your decision maker? What is going to resonate with them? It's really, really important to build the business case, and it's really important to think about what does your decision maker really care about? Like, why should they even care to make a change? What are the benefits that your decision maker or your business are going to see because of this change? And usually when you're talking about the business case, you're not really talking about climate anymore. You're kind of talking more in a business language, right? You're talking about, will it save money? Will it increase profit? Will it reduce inefficiencies? Like, will it set your brand apart? Those are the types of things that your leadership probably cares about. And the last piece, and probably the most important piece, is to connect with other climate concerned colleagues. So definitely, if you haven't already, join your green team at work, or start one if there is none. Share your idea with your colleagues. Even just having one other person who is excited about your idea and will support you is, one, really good for morale, and two, just really important to show your decision maker that it's not just you who wants this thing, it's actually multiple people who want this change and who want to see this change. So really important to connect with others within your organization who care about climate, and then also use communities like Work on Climate outside of your company to connect with others who care about the same things you do and get support from each other. Okay, I talked a lot and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So that's it. Thank you so much. And yeah, happy to chat more about any of these things and answer any questions that y'all have.
Thank you so much, Aiyana. I definitely know that there will be a lot of questions, so feel free to keep putting them in the chat box. We'll start with a question from Elliot Lindbergh from a little while ago. In the beginning, he asked Elliot if you would like to take yourself off mute and ask it yourself. You asked, how can the energy companies be 70% if energy is a quarter of climate change effects? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, that's a great question. Oh, Elliot, if you want to elaborate, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not much more than that. It was just the slide that I saw that the top 100 energy companies account for 70% of GHG emissions.
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, to be honest, I'm not a scientist, so I probably don't have a good answer for it. My best guess, though, is that so electricity accounts for about a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. And I would imagine with energy companies, if you look at the like all scopes of their direct and indirect emissions, that's where I would assume the 70% is coming from. So it's not just electricity being used on site, but they are probably also accounting for the indirect emissions from the use of their products.
Okay, so it's scope 1, 2, at
And
least.
3. Yeah.
And 3, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And Natalie Runyon asked, I'm eager to pursue this, but worry about burnout from prior experience. Any words of wisdom?
Yes, this is probably one of the biggest barriers that employee advocates face in the workplace. And there's a couple of tips I would say. One is like really good green teams. And I know Drew's on here, so please chime in the chat if you have any words of advice, Drew. But I think having like multiple layers of support is really important. So if you're just one person trying to do everything and then you leave your job or you get burnt out, or even if you just go on vacation for a month, like things are going to fall through the cracks. So setting up multiple layers of support. So if someone can't lead on this project, there's someone underneath them that can. Another piece I've seen just anecdotally, I've actually seen quite a few employees just ask their managers if they can dedicate even just like 1 hour a week of their 40-hour work week to climate or sustainability. I know a couple people who have successfully done that, and their managers were just like, yeah, sure, go ahead. So yeah, even just asking your manager, hey, can I spend 1 hour a week just like dedicated to seeing how our company, how my role relates to climate change. And then I would also say, yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot of it is company culture too, because I've seen lots of companies where I think like Google is a good example where they like allow their employees to spend like a certain percentage of their working time on like something that they're really passionate about. I think 3M also does this. They have like a 15% rule where again, employees are allowed to spend 15% of their time on just something that they're passionate about outside of their normal roles and responsibilities. I would look into maybe if that's something that your company would be interested in starting. Maybe it doesn't have to be 15%, maybe 5%. I would also look into if you have any type of professional development opportunity. So like if your company gives you money or gives you time to pursue professional development within working hours, I would try to look into seeing if you can use those opportunities for climate related opportunities. But yeah, I would say the biggest thing though is just connecting with your colleagues and like building that like multiple layer of support system, because yeah, at the end of the day, all of this falling onto one person is just like incredibly unrealistic and unfair. So yeah, definitely look into, if you haven't already, join a green team at work, or create one, and again, start building like that onion of support.
All some really great points. We have a question from Sabrine. How can employees push for climate action in contexts where companies are starting to roll back climate policies, based on, what's currently happening in the US banking sector, and in response to political shifts?
That's a really good question. And I probably am not going to have the best answer. I think, so one thing I have seen, or at least maybe I'm hoping to see, is that companies might be rolling back their like public commitments. Like again, you mentioned the banking sector, like a lot of big banks and financial institutions are kind of deciding to leave these like climate coalitions and networks. And my hope is that a lot of this work will still be happening, but just not publicly and not like publicly advertised. I think in the past 4 or 5 years, you've seen a lot of companies publicly mentioning all of the good things that they're doing because it's been a good brand builder. And now that we're entering this period of like where, like you said, like the government with policy changes, it won't be quite as conducive or friendly to things like climate, or we're seeing this a lot in the DEIJ space as well. I think that a lot of this work might still be happening just under the guise of something else. Like you might not be called sustainability or climate action, but maybe your company is still looking into like switching to renewable energy because renewable energy is just like getting cheaper and cheaper, or whatever it might be. So I would advise folks to do climate action and advocate for climate action, not using the word climate. So kind of going back to like what I said earlier about how important it is to build a business case and like speak the language of your company. I think that's going to be even more important in the next few years, to just like build up the idea and the fact that like sustainability is just better for business. And like I said, maybe you don't even have to use the word sustainability, but like think about, yeah, is it gonna set your brand apart? Is it gonna save money? Is a competitor doing it? Yeah, just like really thinking about like what your leadership and what your company really cares about, and then like kind of finding those intersections with sustainability and climate. So yeah, I don't know if that really answered your question, but all of that to say is I think a lot of it will still be happening, but just not like is advertised as much.
Really, really great points. Alex also added in the chat a couple points to, that while the US federal regulatory environment may be changing, most work, especially regarding energy, is actually pushed by local municipalities and at the state level. And that there are always local advocacy groups, and you can get involved and learn what your city council is doing.
Yes.
Do we have any other questions? Does anyone, you can raise your hand if you don't want to put it in the chat. Aiyana, that's one great question. How do you personally cope with climate anxiety? I think we all are very curious to know.
You will be the first to admit I haven't been doing a great job recently. I feel like, yeah, just totally honestly, I've definitely been doom scrolling with like the LA wildfires the past couple of weeks. But one thing that I do think is tried and true that I try to always remember is, and it's so simple, but like literally just going on a walk has been so helpful for me to like pull me away from my screen. So like just walking is a really important way of how I cope with climate anxiety or just like anxiety in general, and getting outside. And I think honestly doing like presentations like this and just connecting with other people is the best way to cope with climate anxiety. Like the best way to cope with climate anxiety is to like actually do some, like take action. And I know taking action can seem very, very lofty and like you have to do like this big thing right away, but it can literally just be as simple as like joining a presentation, joining the Work on Climate Slack, and just like knowing that there are so many other people that also really care and also are suffering from climate anxiety, like has helped reduce my climate anxiety a lot. And yeah, and just like talking to like other really passionate people and seeing what other people are working on, yeah, has definitely helped me. So those are the two ways I cope, is like getting outside and moving my body, and then just connecting with other people who also are like scared, and we just like commiserate together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time for any more questions. But whether we will be sending resources afterwards. So I would just like to say thank you so much to Aiyana, and to our volunteers for a really brilliant, amazing session. And thank you to everyone for joining and participating. We would love and really appreciate if you could take a few moments before you go to give us some live feedback. It really helps us improve our events so we can support the wider community. And you can follow the link in the chat. As I mentioned, we'll be sending a post-event email with links to some key resources shared during the event. So thank you again for your interest in funding climate change solutions. And we're all in this together. So thank you all, and wishing you a wonderful day.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
obviously, please join the Learn Workplace Climate Action Slack sub-channel and community, and this channel Work on Climate Slack in general. The link is in the chat.
Thanks so much. Have a great week.